Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, finally, as this weekend was MegaCon weekend in Orlando. It was a ton of fun. My voice is still very tired, but obviously I still want to get a box office breakdown because we got to talk about Argylle, even though it won a very, 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 very slow box office weekend. It is still expected to be a massive and catastrophic flop because of just how much money they spent, wasted, whatever word you want to use for it, on the actual film itself, to the point where even if the film cost half as much as is being projected that it did cost, which is roughly $200 million, despite what the director might try to say, off the record or whatever the record might actually be. Let's just say, even at $100 million budget, this film still a massive, massive flop. We'll talk about the numbers here and a bunch of other stuff. Before we get into further, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over at Odyssey, smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So this past weekend was a ton of fun over at MegaCon. So thank you to everyone out there who was able to make it and was able to say hi and have conversations. It was great. But let's go ahead and dive now into the box office numbers. First, going on to geeksandgamers.com, because remember, I'm now a writer for geeksandgamers.com, and that's where the Geeks and Gamers box office breakdown is now living. And as you can see, box office breakdown for the weekend, indeed, Argylle wins another slow weekend, making an estimated $18 million, which, by the way, has actually now gone down. The film ended up only making $17.4 million in the update. As you all know, we get projections on Sunday, and then we get the actuals coming in Monday, Tuesday. So the film actually made less domestically overall compared to what was initially being anticipated there. So not a very good look. $35.3 million worldwide. That also has gone down to $34.7 million. With a $200 million budget alone, the Argylle needs to make roughly between $500 and $600 million in order to break even, and we're talking there about worldwide numbers. The fact that it had a wide international release and it's not performing well in those markets either indicates that the film will either be another massive theatrical flop for Apple, that the film will be another massive theatrical flop for Apple original films. So this is something that we've now seen consistently from both Amazon movies and also even from Apple movies as well, where they're putting, and pumping so much money into these projects. They're still releasing them theatrically, and all of them are ending up being massive, massive flops. And it's interesting because even over at Deadline, right, they're mentioning the fact that some people brought this up saying, this is chump change for Apple, right? Apple is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, so, losing hundreds of millions of dollars is not going to be that big of a deal. Even Tony at Deadline had to mention in his own box office breakdown for this past weekend, had to mention that, when it comes to companies like this and when it comes to massive numbers like this, no. This is not just something that you write off. This is not just something that you just, shrug off. This is still a massive, massive loss for them as a company. And so ultimately we have to just take that again. When Tony is saying that over at Deadline, there's got to be something to it, because he's not usually one to admit when these things are not doing nearly as well as they possibly can. I said, though some money may be received from Universal as a distributor, these kinds of losses are going to be hard to recover from. And the top five, this was again as of on Sunday. Argylle was number 1. The Chosen Season 4, which had episodes 1 through 3 come out, actually made $6 million over the weekend. So those would all be shown at the same time, back to back to back. And so that actually ended up beating out The Beekeeper. Now, The Beekeeper is one that a lot of people have been focusing on, right? Because this is a film that a lot of people have been enjoying. I myself am not really that drawn to it. Jason Statham films in general don't really, kind of move the needle to me. David Ayer is also not a director that I really care that much for. And so I've kind of been dragging my feet to even want to watch the film, but can't deny the fact that the holds have been very, very strong. And the film has now on paper been able to make its money back and making some profits. But I've talked about this before, that even though the film is getting a lot of hype around it, it's not set to be a massive box office money maker. Okay. So it's still going to make money. It's still going to make profit. And obviously that is going to be a very important factor, as we all know. But when it comes to being, massive big hits, the kind of drops that it's seeing, the kind of holds that it's seeing, is not actually, matching up to the kind of numbers that is expected to make as far as profits are concerned. And a lot of that still comes down to the fact that we still don't have an actual confirmed budget for the film yet. And again, interestingly enough, I actually checked Wikipedia the other day, because that tends to, list budgets, but also has sources to back them up. And when I checked it, they had a budget listed, and it's the same budget that's been posted by that Indian site, but they did not have the actual citation for it, which again, always check the citations on Wikipedia, especially because at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people on the internet making edits to, an online, encyclopedia which means that things can be wrong from time to time. So always check your sources in that instance. But as a recording of this video, still no actual reported budget from any legitimate sources. Going over to Wonka, $4.7 million, another 16% drop. So again, this film is now, what, 10 plus weeks out from its initial release. Let's go ahead and see if we can go to the numbers weekend chart here just to get a better understanding. Yeah, Wonka has been out for now 8 weekends. And so this film has been out since Christmas time, and it is still doing well, right? This film is still holding well, has now officially crossed over $200 million, as I said it would, in the domestic marketplace. And even though this film is definitely making a lot more money internationally, because it's still making 200 plus million domestically, that is where it's getting, a huge portion of its money. And that is ultimately why it's able to make up for its pretty modest size budget, all right? So again, Wonka doing very well. And then also Migration, also still in the top 5 this weekend. Mean Girls, the remake of Mean Girls got dropped from the top 5. And again, the fact that The Chosen was able to be a part of bumping Mean Girls out definitely makes me quite happy. I'm not someone very much drawn to or interested in the Chosen series. I know everyone recommends it, but just again, to see a Mean Girls remake that no one really asked for get bumped out of a top 5 by a film about, or rather a series about Jesus, I don't know. Kind of makes me happy there. We also have, again, Migration coming in the number 5 spot. As I mentioned, 16% drop, $4.1 million. And this is another film where it's like that little engine that could. So it's not making the massive profits. It's not the biggest thing that they've ever done as a company, but it's still very impressive. It's still doing very, very well based on what we have. Another part of the article that I wrote for Kids and Gamers talks about how Wonka is continuing to impress. Again, this film has seen massive, massive holds, very, very strong holds, just ever since the very beginning of its initial release. So I'm very happy to see that is actually happening, right? The movie has had another strong hold this weekend and made another appearance in the top 5 highest grossing films domestically. It would be easy to point the lack of new content competition, but the fact that remains that Wonka has been punching well above its weight since it first came out. And it says the previous top 2 films, Mean Girls and Beekeeper, also had strong holds that I've previously mentioned. Neither is really doing much of anything due to their budgets. I also give a great explanation about why Aquaman's box office is a massive catastrophic failure. So if you are someone interested in that topic, go check out my article at GazeGamers.com for more information about that. But now going into, again, just talking a bit more about what we see. So Aquaman Lost Kingdom, again, on paper, 28% drop. It's not terrible, but this film is essentially done in theaters. And just to summarize, this film is one that's doing too much money overseas. And because of its massive budget, it's not making the money in the markets that it needs to in order to break even. So well over $100 million of financial losses right now for Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom when you take into account the domestic and international splits and what its actual budget is and likely marketing costs actually are as well. You also have some Oscar contenders that are in the mix as well in the top 10. American Fiction, Poor Things. I've talked about American Fiction before. I actually really like the film. It's not my favorite film of the year. I gave it a rad score over on Critic List. By the way, check out my profile over on Critic List. It's an amazing site. Got to meet Blaine. Shout out to him, who's the CEO of Critic List at MegaCon. Awesome dude. Keeps it real and is just a really awesome guy. So go support him just by, again, joining the site for free. And again, the more people that he gets, the better chance he has of being able to eventually get ads on the site. And I know that everyone hates ads, but ultimately, hey, any business that you make's got to make money somehow, and rather it be making money from ads than from any other means, which we see some other companies try to actually do, right? But American Fiction, great film, something that I think that people should try to see. So happy to see that film doing well. Poor Things is one that, again, ever since it came out, to me, it just seems like the kind of modern Hollywood fare, creepy nonsense that just they tend to be pushing these days. But hey, it is in the top 10, and so again, one has to say at least to mention that much. So as I mentioned with Argylle before, I'm making $34.7 million because the film cost $200 million based on typical trends, right? 2.5 times the budget. That means the film needs to make roughly $500 million. If you take a 3 times multiplier, that brings it up to $600 million. So somewhere in that range is what the film needs to make. Making only $34.7 million means right now the film is around $279 million in the red. So we've seen these kinds of numbers before. I mean, if you go back to Killers of the Flower Moon, this film I think definitely did better than expected, especially in the long run, but still not enough, right? I mean, if you look at, compared to its first 2 weeks account for 34% of its budget. So this is a chart-breaking film, Killers of the Flower Moon was, right? In that positive direction, right? Where it just did better than expected, but it still ended up being a $200+ million loser, right? So even though it did better than projections because it cost so much to make and because they just made so little, ultimately doesn't really matter that they did better than expected. So when you have a film like Argylle, which is doing worse than expected, this film will probably end up being $250 million in the red by the end of its run. Now, again, still too early to tell. We'll make the official projections after the second weekend box office, but just the fact alone that this movie is just not doing much of anything, it's not moving the needle, that not just professional critics, but also just regular everyday people, including regular everyday critics, like I like to describe as Jeremy Jahns to be, the fact that he is even very, very critical of this movie, to me, tells me quite a bit. And I think that ultimately what this is showing is that Argylle is just not going to move the needle. It is going to be a massive financial failure. And it's got to ask the question and beg the question, what is Apple? Apple and Amazon, these major studios, going to do when they keep pumping hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into all these different projects and they're not making anything back? Right. And again, if they actually release the numbers to show us, okay, how many new subscribers did you get because of this movie? How many subscribers did you keep because of this movie? Right. To get actual viewing numbers, let alone, again, we get the hour count, but that doesn't always tell us much of anything. Right. Ultimately, all we can take then is that these are just losses and losses and losses. And if, again, it's just one random movie that ends up being a flop, that's one thing. But when it's several movies and several of them are losing hundreds of millions of dollars, it's kind of hard to really write that off. And I think, again, shout out, I don't give him a shout out often, but shout out to Tony for at least keeping it real when it comes to that part of it. But anyway, that is the numbers for Argylle. Just some updates. Also, ISS, still a massive flop. The Book of Clarence, still a flop as well. Beekeeper, as you can see, $13 million right now in the black. So this film is definitely performing still, again, as far as what expectations were. But remember, again, a large portion of this is still coming from overseas. And so this film is probably closer to that break-even point and less profitability. And again, as I mentioned previously, this film is definitely going to be making money, but just not really a whole lot of it. Mean Girls on paper has made money back too. Obviously, it does have some from overseas, but most of it's coming from the domestic marketplace. So this film also in a similar boat where it'll make some money, but not a whole lot, especially nothing in comparison to the original film. Night Swim is now breaking even and making a little bit of money. And really, those are the only major films that we have been covering that have really done much of anything. But again, what are y'all's thoughts about these numbers? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, just one last thing, I will say it's great to see Iron Claw is also a chart breaker here, doing more than twice as much as it did in its first 2 weeks of release, and it's actually on the cusp of breaking even. So this film is definitely one that I think people should go and see. Unfortunately, it's been in theaters, been out of theaters. A24 is always very weird with their releases, but if it's near you, recommend it. It's my favorite movie of 2023. I definitely think y'all should check that out, and also check out my articles over at geeksandgamers.com if you want to find out more information about that as well. Also, make sure that you vote for the Raven Awards. That's right, the Raven Awards are still ongoing, so if you want to submit your ballot for the best and worst in film in 2023, make sure to check out my website, OMBReviews.com. Check out the Raven Awards tab, and you'll find a link to the ballot there. Anyway, you guys seriously are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, like the farm, and obviously smash the rumble button as well. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.
And now for a very special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off with my Patreon Chosen members, Father Luca Illich, shout out to you, Father. Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider. And Miss Mountain Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. And to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to a giveaways channel on my Discord and plenty of other extra content as well, random crazy stuff out there, check out the YouTube memberships and other membership platforms in the top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.